The message came without warning. Every screen in human space lit up at the same moment. Ships near Earth, colonies on Mars, mining stations in the asteroid belt, everyone saw the same thing. An alien face appeared, insect-like with huge eyes that seemed to swallow light instead of reflecting it. Its mouth parts moved in strange ways as a computer turned its words into English. Dan Miller stood on the bridge of his ship, the ESS Valiant. He was a captain with 15 years of experience in space. He had seen many strange things out here among the stars, but never anything like this. His crew gathered around the main screen watching the alien speak. "I am Commander Zethrak of the Hive Collective," the alien said. Its voice came out flat and cold through the translation system. "We have captured one of your vessels. Inside are 217 humans. They are alive. For now." Dan felt his stomach tighten. He looked over at Katie Price, his communications officer. She was young, maybe 25, but good at her job. Her fingers were already moving across her console, trying to find where the message was coming from. She caught his eye and shook her head. "The signal was blocked somehow. You will pay us for their return," the alien continued. "We want 1,000 kilograms of uranium. We want 500 kilograms of platinum. We want all information about your quantum drive technology. You will bring these things to coordinates we will send you. You have 72 hours. If you do not pay, we will kill one human every hour until you do." The screen went dark. For a moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. Then everyone started talking at once. "Sir, I'm trying to trace that signal," Katie said. "They took the Northern Star," said another officer, checking ship registries. "It's a cargo freighter. The manifest shows 217 people on board. Most of them are engineers and their families. They were heading to the mining colony on Titan." Dan turned to Frank Hughes, his tactical officer. Frank was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and scars from his years in the service. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command. Use the secure channel. Now." "Yes, sir." Within minutes, Dan was looking at Admiral Lisa Grant on his screen. She was in a meeting room on Earth with 3 other high-ranking officers. Dan knew Grant well. He had served under her command for 8 years before getting his own ship. She was tough, smart, and she never made easy choices when hard ones were needed. "You saw the transmission?" Grant said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. They have the Northern Star and everyone on board." Grant's face was hard to read, but Dan could see the anger in her eyes. "They think we're weak. They think because we care about individual lives, we'll give them whatever they want." "Ma'am, there are children on that ship," Dan said carefully. "I know, Captain. I've already seen the full manifest. Engineers, teachers, medical staff. 43 children under the age of 12. Grant paused, and for just a second Dan saw her control slip. Her jaw tightened. Then she was back to being the Admiral. "But if we pay this ransom, what happens next? Every pirate in the galaxy will know that kidnapping humans is profitable. Every hostile species will see us as easy targets." Dan had expected this answer. It was the right answer, even if it was hard to accept. "What are your orders, ma'am?" "Find them," Grant said. "Find that ship and bring our people home. But we don't negotiate. We don't pay ransoms. We never have, and we're not starting now. Show these aliens what happens when they threaten humanity." The transmission ended. Dan stood there for a moment, thinking. Around him, his crew waited for orders. They all knew what was coming. They were going to war, but this war would be different. It wouldn't be about territory or resources. It would be about principles, Katie, Dan said, turning to his communications officer. "Can you track them?" "Maybe," she said, her fingers already working. The transmission was blocked, but they had to send it from somewhere. Their technology is different from ours. It leaves traces like footprints in mud. If I can find those traces, I can follow them. How long? "Give me an hour," Dan nodded. "You have 30 minutes. Frank, start running combat scenarios. I want to know what we're up against. If these are hive ships, what are their capabilities? What are their weaknesses?" "On it, sir." The bridge became a hive of activity. People moved with purpose, calling out information, checking systems, preparing for what was coming. Dan walked to the front of the bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 217 humans were prisoners. They were scared. They probably thought nobody was coming for them. They were wrong. Paul Jensen, the science officer, came to stand beside Dan. Paul was in his 40s, a calm man who thought before he spoke. "The Hive Collective," he said quietly. "We don't know much about them. They made contact with us 3 years ago. The relationship has been tense but never hostile. Until now. What changed? Dan asked. Maybe they saw an opportunity. Maybe they're testing us. Or maybe this is how they operate with every species they meet. Take hostages, demand payment, see who's weak. They're about to learn that humanity isn't weak. Paul nodded. The thing about the Hive is that they don't think like us. They're a collective species. Individual lives don't mean anything to them. The group is everything. They expect other species to be the same way, to make cold calculations about acceptable losses. But we're not like that, Dan said. No, we value every single life. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us strong, even if they can't see it. Katie's voice interrupted them. Captain, I've got something. Their quantum drives use biological components. It's weird technology, but it leaves organic traces in subspace. I can track it. Good work. How far ahead are they? 2 days, maybe 3. But they're not moving fast. They're waiting for us to respond to their demands. Dan smiled grimly. Oh, we'll respond. Just not the way they expect. Set a course, maximum speed. Frank, I want all weapons ready. We're going to get our people back. The Valiant's engines powered up, pushing the ship faster than was probably safe. But safety wasn't the priority right now. Speed was everything. Every hour that passed was another hour those hostages spent in fear, another hour closer to the deadline. As the ship jumped into quantum space, Dan sat in his command chair and thought about what was coming. The Hive had made a mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen weakness where there was only compassion. They had seen compromise where there was only principle. They were about to learn the difference. The chase had begun, and Dan knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Hive had issued a challenge and humanity would answer. Not with money or technology or surrender. With fire and steel and the absolute refusal to let evil win. The Valiant moved through space like a hunting shark. For 2 days, the ship had been following the trail left by the Hive vessels. Katie sat at her station, eyes locked on her screens, tracking the faint signals that the alien ships left behind. She barely slept, taking only short breaks when other crew members forced her to rest. Dan watched his crew work with pride. They all knew what was at stake. 217 innocent people were depending on them. There was no room for error, no time for mistakes. We're getting closer, Katie said, her voice tired but determined. The signals are getting stronger. I estimate we'll catch up to them in about 6 hours. Good, Dan replied. Frank, what do we know about Hive military capabilities? Frank pulled up information on the main screen. Not as much as I'd like, sir. We've only had 3 encounters with Hive military vessels, all of them peaceful. But intelligence suggests they favor numbers over individual ship strength. They typically travel in groups of 3 to 5 ships. So we're probably looking at multiple targets. Yes, sir. And they'll have the advantage of position. They've had time to choose their battlefield. Paul Jensen spoke up from his station. I've been studying their technology. Their shields operate on a different frequency than ours. They use biological systems integrated with their machinery. It makes them efficient, but it also gives them a weakness. What kind of weakness? Dan asked. If we can disrupt their biological systems, we can take down their shields. I'm working on a frequency that should do it, but I need more data. I need to see their ships in action. Dan nodded. You'll get your chance soon enough. The hours passed slowly. The crew ran through battle drills, checked weapon systems, and prepared for combat. Everyone knew their job. Everyone was ready. When Katie finally spotted the Hive ships on sensors, the tension on the bridge jumped to a new level. Got them, she said. They're in an asteroid field about 2 million kilometers ahead. I'm reading 3 ships, 1 cruiser, 2 smaller escort vessels. The Northern Star is with them, engines cold. Smart, Frank muttered. They picked terrain that favors defense. Those asteroids will scatter our weapons fire and limit our maneuverability. Dan studied the tactical display. The asteroid field was dense, full of rocks ranging from the size of cars to the size of mountains. It was dangerous territory for any ship. It also limits their maneuverability. Katie, can you get a message to the Northern Star without the Hive intercepting it? Katie thought for a moment, her fingers dancing across her controls. Maybe. If I use a tight beam laser and bounce it off that big metallic asteroid near them, I might be able to reach them without the Hive noticing. But we'll need to get closer. Do it. And be careful. I don't want to tip our hand yet. The Valiant moved closer, using a large asteroid for cover. Katie worked her magic with the communication system, bending a laser signal around obstacles until it reached the Northern Star. The message was simple and text-only to avoid detection. On the Northern Star, Captain Greg Barnes felt his hidden communicator vibrate in his boot. The Hive boarding party had searched everyone when they first took the ship, but they had been sloppy. They hadn't thought to check thoroughly for concealed devices. Greg was in the cargo bay with all the other prisoners. The Hive had herded everyone there, packing them in like animals. It was uncomfortable and frightening, especially for the children. But Greg had been in tough situations before. He kept his crew calm, moving through the crowd and talking quietly to people. He carefully pulled out the small communicator and read the message. His face remained neutral, but inside his heart was racing. The Valiant was here. Help was coming. He made his way to his senior officers, 6 people he trusted completely. There was Linda Shaw, his first officer, a tough woman who had worked cargo haulers for 20 years. There was Chris Wade, a young engineer with a brilliant mind. Chris's wife Beth was nearby, holding their 5-year-old daughter Emma close. Earth sent help, Greg whispered to them. The Valiant is in position. They attack in 30 minutes. When they do, we need to be ready. Chris, can you get to engineering? If I can get past the Hive guards, yes, Chris replied. Linda, you take a team to the bridge. If we can control our own ship, we can help with the fight. Linda nodded. What about the guards? There are only 6 of them in here with us, Greg said, looking around carefully. We outnumber them 36-1. When the attack starts, they'll be distracted. That's when we move. He passed the word quietly through the cargo bay. People needed to be ready but couldn't show it. The Hive might not understand human emotions well, but even they would notice if everyone suddenly got tense and excited. The minutes crawled by. Parents held their children. Engineers checked their tools, thinking about how they could be used as weapons if needed. Everyone waited. On the Hive cruiser's bridge, Commander Zethrak was getting impatient. The human deadline was approaching, and there had been no response. No negotiation attempts, no pleas for more time, nothing. It was strange. Every species the Hive had dealt with before had tried to negotiate. Commander, one of his crew members clicked in the Hive language. I'm detecting a human vessel, single-ship destroyer class. It's approaching our position. Zethrak felt a flutter of satisfaction. Finally, they've come to pay. About time. What took them so long? Should we hail them? No, let them come to us. Let them see their helpless people and understand their weak position. But then the human ship did something unexpected. Instead of approaching slowly and broadcasting surrender, it sent a direct communication request. Zethrak accepted it, curious about what the humans would say. Captain Dan Miller's face appeared on the screen. Zethrak studied the human carefully. This one didn't look scared or desperate. His eyes were calm, calculating. Dangerous. Commander Zethrak, Dan said. I'm Captain Miller of the Earth Space Service. I'm here to deliver a message from Admiral Grant and the people of Earth. Good, Zethrak replied. You have our payment? The uranium, the platinum, the technology? No, Dan said simply. We don't pay ransoms. We don't negotiate with kidnappers. We never have, and we're not starting now with you. Zethrak felt confusion, then anger. You refuse? You doom your own people to death? I'm here to give you one chance, Dan continued, his voice hard. Release the Northern Star and everyone on board. Do that, and you can leave this system alive. Refuse and we'll take them back by force. Zethrak's mandibles spread in what passed for a laugh among his people. You are one small ship. We are 3. You are surrounded by asteroids that will destroy you if you try to fight here. You have no chance. You're wrong about that, Dan said. You're wrong about a lot of things, actually. You think humanity is weak because we care about individuals. You think we'll pay anything to avoid casualties. You don't understand us at all. Then explain, Zethrak demanded. We're a species that survived 2 world wars. We split the atom and then decided not to destroy ourselves with it. We've colonized hostile worlds. We've overcome every challenge put in front of us. You know why? Because we're stubborn. Because we refuse to give up. And because we absolutely will not let bullies win. Big words from a small ship, Zethrak said. Dan smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. You have 30 seconds to decide. Then we stop talking. Then I will begin executing hostages immediately, Zethrak replied. No, Dan said quietly. You won't. Because in 30 seconds you're going to be too busy trying to survive. The communication ended. Zethrak stared at the blank screen, confused. What did the human mean? He turned to his tactical officer. Weapons ready. If they approach, destroy them. But the human ship didn't approach. It just sat there quiet and still. Zathrak was about to order another hail when his sensors officer made an urgent clicking sound. Commander, I'm detecting multiple small objects in the asteroid field. They're activating. What? What kind of objects? Explosives. Hundreds of them. They're everywhere. The first mine detonated 300 meters from the Hive escort ship on the left. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 100. The asteroid field lit up like a festival of fireworks. Explosions blooming in rapid sequence. The Hive ship scrambled to evade, but the mines were everywhere, carefully placed over hours of patient work. And then the Valiant came screaming out from behind its asteroid, all weapons firing, moving at full speed directly toward the heart of the Hive formation. The battle had begun. The mines exploded in waves across the asteroid field. Frank Hughes had spent hours carefully positioning them while the Valiant stayed hidden. They were simple devices, old technology, but that was exactly why they worked. The Hive's sophisticated sensors had been looking for advanced weapons and missed the simple ones floating quietly in space. The first Hive escort ship took 3 direct hits. Its shields flared bright blue and then failed completely. A fourth mine caught it on the port side, tearing a hole in the hull. The ship spun wildly, crashing into a large asteroid. Metal shrieked as the hull breached. Atmosphere vented into space in a white cloud of frozen air. One down, Frank said calmly from his tactical station, targeting the second escort. The Valiant's railguns opened fire. These weapons accelerated small projectiles to incredible speeds, turning tiny pieces of metal into devastating weapons. When something hits you at a significant fraction of light speed, shields don't matter much. Physics takes over. The second escort ship tried to dodge, but it was too slow. Railgun rounds punched through its shields and into the hull. One round hit the engine section. There was a bright flash as the ship's power core went critical. The escort tumbled away, dead in space, emergency lights flickering. 2 down, Frank reported. The cruiser is coming about. They're charging weapons. Evasive maneuvers, Dan ordered. Katie, start jamming their targeting systems. Paul, you ready with that frequency? Almost, Paul called out, his hands flying over his console. I need them to fire first so I can read their shield harmonics. Just a few more seconds. The Hive cruiser was bigger than the Valiant and carried more weapons. Plasma bolts started filling the space between them. Bright green streaks of superheated matter that could melt through a ship's hull. Missiles launched from the cruiser's tubes, dozens of them, all seeking the Valiant. Dan's pilot, a young man named Terry Cole, was good at his job. The Valiant twisted and turned through the asteroid field, using the rocks for cover. The ship's computer predicted collision courses, and Terry followed its guidance, making turns that would have been impossible for a human alone to calculate. A plasma bolt grazed the Valiant's shields. Alarms blared. The shields held, but they were at 70% power now. Return fire, Dan ordered. Keep them busy. Paul, how much longer? Got it, Paul shouted. Shield frequency locked. Loading it into a torpedo now. Frank, as soon as that torpedo is ready, put it right down their throat. With pleasure, sir. Inside the Northern Star's cargo bay, the prisoners felt the explosions reverberating through the ship. That was their signal. Greg Barnes stood up and caught the eye of his key people. They all nodded. The Hive guards in the cargo bay were distracted. Their attention was on the battle happening outside. They were clicking at each other in their own language, probably trying to figure out what was happening. Greg didn't give them time to figure it out. He rushed the nearest guard, hitting it low and hard. The insect alien went down, surprised by the sudden attack. Around him, other crew members moved at the same time. 40 people converged on 6 guards. It wasn't a fair fight, and Greg didn't care about fair. The guards had weapons, but they never got a chance to use them. Weight of numbers won. Within 2 minutes, all 6 guards were subdued, their weapons taken. Chris, Linda, go, Greg shouted. Everyone else stay here and stay quiet. Don't give them a reason to send more guards. Chris Wade ran for the engineering section with 3 other engineers. His wife Beth wanted to come with him, but he'd told her to stay with Emma. If something went wrong, at least his daughter would have her mother. The corridors were empty. Most of the Hive crew was probably on their own ship, dealing with the battle. Chris reached engineering and found only 2 Hive workers there. They looked up in surprise as the humans burst in. Sorry about this, Chris said. and he and his team tackled the aliens. They were engineers, not fighters, but desperation made them strong. They tied up the hive workers with electrical cables and got to work on the ship's systems. Life support is stable, one engineer called out. I'm locking out hive access to critical systems. Good, Chris said. Bring the engines online. Slow and quiet. We don't want to attract attention yet. Meanwhile, Linda Shaw led her team toward the bridge. This was more dangerous. The bridge would be better defended. But when they got there, they found it empty. The hive crew had abandoned the Northern Star when the battle started, retreating to their own vessels. Bridge secure, Linda called over her communicator. Greg, we have helm control. Good work, Greg's voice came back. Stand by. When I give the word, fire up the engines and get us away from these hive ships. On the Valiant's bridge, Paul Jensen had finished programming the torpedo. The weapon was loaded with a special warhead designed to emit a frequency that would disrupt the hive's biological shield systems. Torpedo ready, Frank announced. Firing now. The torpedo streaked through space, dodging asteroids with its guidance system. The hive cruiser fired at it with point defense weapons, but Frank had anticipated that. He'd launched 3 decoy torpedoes at the same time. The hive couldn't tell which was real. The real torpedo hit the cruiser's shields and detonated. Instead of a normal explosion, it released a pulse of energy tuned to the exact frequency that would interfere with the hive's biological systems. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The shields didn't just fail, they collapsed catastrophically, sending feedback through the ship's power grid. Lights flickered across the hive cruiser. Systems went offline. Emergency alerts sounded on their bridge. Now, Dan shouted. All weapons fire! The Valiant unleashed everything it had. Railguns, missiles, and laser batteries all fired at once. The hive cruiser without shields was vulnerable. Rounds hit the hull, punching holes in the armor. Missiles struck the weapon ports, destroying the plasma cannons. Lasers burned through antenna arrays and sensor clusters. The hive cruiser tried to maneuver, tried to bring its remaining weapons to bear, but it was too late. The Valiant was faster, more agile, and its crew was fighting with the desperation of people protecting their own. Inside the hive cruiser, Commander Zethrak held onto his command chair as another explosion rocked the ship. Alarms were screaming. Half his systems were offline. His crew was clicking frantically, trying to restore power. Fall back, Zethrak ordered. All ships retreat. But the escort ships were already destroyed. The cruiser was alone, crippled, unable to run. Human vessel is hailing us, an officer reported. Zethrak accepted the communication. Captain Miller's face appeared again, but this time the human wasn't smiling. Weapons offline, shields down, engines damaged, Dan said. You're not going anywhere, Commander. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to order your crew to stand down. Any hive personnel still on the Northern Star will surrender immediately. You will allow us to recover our people unharmed. And if I refuse? Zethrak asked, though he already knew he had lost. Then I'll keep shooting until your ship breaks apart. Dan replied simply. I don't want to kill you, Commander. But I will if I have to. Your choice. Zethrak looked around his ruined bridge. He had miscalculated badly. He had thought the humans would be easy prey, soft targets who would pay anything to avoid conflict. Instead, he had found warriors who fought with a ferocity his people couldn't match. We surrender, Zethrak said finally. Smart choice, Dan replied.
Katie, signal the Northern Star. Tell them they're clear to break away. On the Northern Star, Greg received the message and felt relief wash over him.
Linda, get us out of here. Nice and easy. The cargo ship's engines came to life. It pulled away from the hive vessel slowly, gaining speed as it moved into clear space. On the bridge, Linda Shaw allowed herself a small smile. They had done it. They had survived. In the cargo bay, people cheered. Parents hugged their children. Engineers shook hands and clapped each other on the back. They had been prisoners waiting to die. Now they were free. Chris Wade made his way back to the cargo bay and found Beth and Emma. He pulled them both into a tight hug, not caring that tears were running down his face. Daddy, Emma said, you saved us. Not just me, sweetie, Chris said. Captain Miller and the Valiant saved us, and we helped a little bit. The Valiant moved alongside the Northern Star, keeping watch while recovery teams swept the cargo ship for any remaining hive personnel. They found a few, disarmed and scared, hiding in various compartments. They were taken into custody without resistance. Dan sat in his command chair and allowed himself to relax slightly. The battle was over. The hostages were safe, but he knew this was just the beginning. The Hive had learned a lesson today, but the rest of the galaxy needed to learn it too. Humanity doesn't negotiate with kidnappers. Humanity fights back, and humanity wins. The aftermath of the battle was quiet but tense. The Valiant held position near the crippled Hive cruiser, while recovery teams worked to secure the area. The Northern Star floated nearby, its engines humming softly as it maintained a safe distance. Dan Miller stood on his bridge, watching as his crew managed multiple tasks at once. Medical teams were preparing to check everyone on the Northern Star for injuries. Security teams were processing the Hive prisoners. Engineering teams were assessing damage to the Valiant. Everyone had a job and everyone was doing it well. Casualty report, Dan said. Frank Hughes checked his console. On our side, 0 casualties. Minor injuries only, nothing serious. The Northern Star is reporting the same. A few bruises from the takedown of the guards, but everyone is alive and well. Dan felt relief wash through him. They had pulled it off. 217 civilians safe, his own crew unharmed, and the Hive stopped without any loss of life on either side once the fighting ended. The Hive cruiser? Dan asked. 73 crew members, 16 dead from the battle, 21 injured, the rest unharmed. We're preparing to transfer the injured to our medical bay. Do it. I want them treated the same as our own people. Make sure they understand we're not monsters. Katie spoke up from her station. Captain, Commander Zethrak is requesting to speak with you again. Dan nodded. Put him through. The Hive commander's face appeared on the screen. He looked different now, less arrogant, more thoughtful. His mandibles moved slowly as he spoke. Captain Miller, Zethrak began. I do not understand your species. You fought fiercely to rescue your people. You risked your ship and crew. But now you offer medical care to your enemies. Why? Dan considered the question. Because the fighting is over. You surrendered, and we accepted that surrender. What kind of people would we be if we let wounded prisoners suffer when we can help them? The Hive would not do this, Zethrak said quietly. We would leave the wounded to die. Individual lives mean nothing to us. Only the collective matters. That's the difference between us then, Dan replied. To humans, every individual life matters. That's why we fought to rescue those civilians. That's why we're treating your wounded now. It's not weakness. It's who we are. Zethrak was silent for a moment. I have miscalculated badly. The Hive leadership will want to know what happened here. They will want to understand why we failed. Tell them the truth, Dan said. Tell them that humanity can be reasoned with. We can be friends and trading partners, but we cannot be bullied. We will not pay ransoms. We will not surrender to threats. And we will always fight to protect our people. This message will spread across the galaxy, Zethrak said. Other species will hear of this. Good. Let them hear. Let them know what to expect if they try something similar. The communication ended. Dan turned to find Admiral Grant on another screen. She had been monitoring the situation from Earth. Well done, Captain, Grant said. You've done more than rescue hostages today. You've sent a message that will resonate across human space and beyond. Thank you, ma'am. What are your orders regarding the prisoners? We'll arrange a prisoner exchange through diplomatic channels. The Hive Collective's ambassador is already reaching out to us. I think they're more interested in talking than fighting now. What about the Northern Star? Escort them to Titan as planned. Make sure they get there safely. After that, return to Earth. We'll have a full debriefing. Yes, ma'am. Grant's expression softened slightly. Dan, you made the right calls today. You showed restraint where you could and force where you had to. That's good leadership. After the Admiral signed off, Dan walked through his ship. He wanted to see his crew, to thank them personally. He found Katie in the communications room, still monitoring channels. You did excellent work today, he told her. Tracking those ships through their quantum signatures, that was brilliant. Katie looked up, tired but pleased. Thank you, sir. I just kept thinking about those families on the Northern Star. That little girl, Emma, and kids like her. They needed us to be good at our jobs. Dan nodded. And you were. Everyone was. He found Frank in the weapons bay, supervising the reloading of torpedo tubes. The older man looked satisfied with the day's work. That frequency torpedo was something special, Dan said. Paul's a genius, Frank grinned. He is. But I'm the one who had to hit a moving target in an asteroid field. That takes skill. It does, Dan agreed. You've still got it, old man. Old man? I'll have you know I'm in my prime, Frank replied with mock offense. Paul Jensen was in his lab, already working on a report about the Hive's technology. Dan found him surrounded by screens full of data. The biological components in their systems are fascinating, Paul said without looking up. They integrate living tissue with machinery in ways we never considered. It makes them efficient but also vulnerable if you know the right frequencies. Will other species be able to use your technique? Dan asked. Maybe. But the hive will probably change their shield frequencies now that they know we can disrupt them. It's a constant arms race out here. Dan made his way to the medical bay where Dr. Helen Cross was treating the injured hive prisoners. Helen was a stern woman in her 50s with no patience for politics or prejudice. How are they? Dan asked. They'll live, Helen replied. Their biology is strange, but the injuries are straightforward. Burns, fractures, decompression trauma. Nothing we can't handle. Are they giving you any trouble? No. They seem confused that we're helping them. One of them tried to refuse treatment. I told him that wasn't his choice to make. If he's on my ship, he gets medical care whether he wants it or not. Dan smiled. That sounds like you. The next day, the Valiant escorted the Northern Star toward Titan. The journey would take 3 days at safe speeds. Greg Barnes invited Dan to come aboard for a meal, and Dan accepted. He took Katie and Frank with him. The Northern Star's mess hall was packed with crew and families. When Dan and his officers entered, everyone stood and applauded. Dan felt uncomfortable with the attention but understood they needed this. Needed to thank someone. Greg Barnes raised a glass. To Captain Miller and the crew of the Valiant. You came for us when we thought no one would. You risked your lives for ours. We won't forget that. The crowd echoed the toast. Dan raised his own glass. You kept your heads when it mattered most. You took back your ship when you had the chance. You helped save yourselves. That took courage. Later, Dan met Emma, the 5-year-old daughter of Chris and Beth Wade. She walked up to him shyly, holding a drawing she had made. It showed a ship with Valiant written on it in crayon, surrounded by stars. Thank you for saving my daddy, Emma said quietly. Dan knelt down to her level. Your daddy helped save himself. He was very brave. And so were you. I was scared, Emma admitted. Being scared is okay, Dan told her. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared. Emma seemed to think about this, then nodded seriously. Okay, I'll remember that. As Dan and his officers returned to the Valiant, Frank spoke up. That's why we do this job, isn't it? For kids like Emma, for families like the Wades. Yes, Dan agreed. That's exactly why we do it. The journey to Titan continued without incident. When the Northern Star finally docked at the mining colony, there was a celebration. News of the rescue had spread ahead of them. People were calling it a triumph of human determination, but Dan knew it was more than that. It was a statement, a line drawn in the stars. Humanity would not be victims, would not be prey, would not surrender its principles out of fear. The message was spreading across the galaxy. Some species heard it with respect, others with fear, but all of them heard it clearly. Dear aliens, you won't get a ransom from us. You'll get something far more dangerous. You'll get humanity at its finest. 3 weeks after the incident, Dan Miller sat in a conference room on Earth. The debriefing had taken days. Every detail of the rescue had been examined, analyzed, and documented. Now came the harder part, figuring out what it all meant. Admiral Grant was there, along with diplomats, military strategists, and intelligence officers. On the screens around the room were representatives from human colonies across the solar system and beyond. The Hive Collective has formally apologized, one diplomat said. Commander Zethrak has been removed from command. They claim he acted without authorization, that the kidnapping was not approved by their leadership. Do we believe that? Grant asked. The diplomat shrugged. Hard to say. It might be true, or they might be saving face after a failed operation. Either way, they're willing to negotiate a formal treaty to prevent future incidents. What about the other species? Another officer asked. How are they reacting? An intelligence analyst pulled up a report. Mixed reactions. Some species see us as dangerously aggressive. They're worried we might be expansionist. Others see us as potential allies, strong enough to stand up to bullies. And some, the ones who prey on weaker species, they're being more careful around human ships now. Grant nodded slowly. Good. Fear isn't ideal, but respect based on strength is acceptable. What about the ransom message itself? Has it spread? It's everywhere, the analyst confirmed. Every species with communication technology has heard about it. Some are calling it the Human Declaration. The idea that humanity will never negotiate with kidnappers has become widely known. Dan spoke up. Is that causing problems? Are other hostages being hurt because their captors know we won't pay? Surprisingly, no, the analyst replied. The opposite, actually. Reports of kidnappings targeting humans have dropped by 70% in the last 3 weeks. Pirates and raiders are avoiding human ships. They're going after easier targets. Because they know we'll come after them, Frank Hughes said from his seat next to Dan. Exactly. The cost-benefit analysis doesn't work anymore. Why kidnap humans when they'll hunt you down instead of paying? It's not worth the risk. Grant leaned back in her chair. So we've achieved what we wanted. We've protected our people by refusing to be victims. But we need to be careful. This reputation for strength needs to be balanced with diplomacy. We don't want to be seen as warmongers. Agreed, one of the diplomats said. We're already working on that. We're offering trade agreements, technology exchanges, and mutual defense pacts with species who want to work with us. We're showing that we can be good friends even though we're dangerous enemies. The meeting continued for hours, discussing policy and strategy. Finally, Grant dismissed everyone except Dan. How are you holding up, Captain? She asked when they were alone. Dan thought about it. Tired, ma'am? It was intense, I know, but you handled it perfectly. You saved those people without compromising our principles. That's not easy. I kept thinking about Emma, Dan admitted. That little girl. If we'd paid the ransom, if we'd shown weakness, she might have been kidnapped again someday by someone else. The only way to protect her long-term was to make sure kidnappers knew humans were a bad target. That's the hard truth of leadership, Grant said. Sometimes you have to risk lives to save lives. The decision you made, the one I supported, it will save countless humans in the future, but it required risking those people on the Northern Star. It worked out this time, Dan said quietly. It did. Because you're good at your job and you had a good crew, but you're right to think about what could have gone wrong. Leaders who don't think about that, who don't feel the weight of their decisions, they make bad choices eventually. Grant stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Earth below. The galaxy is watching us now. Humanity has announced itself as a species that can't be pushed around. That brings new responsibilities. We need captains like you, leaders who understand when to fight and when to talk. What's next for the Valiant? Dan asked. Patrol duty for a few weeks while we make repairs. Then I have something else in mind. We're establishing new colonies in the Outer Rim. They'll need protection and support. Interested? Yes, ma'am. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the message was indeed spreading. In the Hive Collective's home system, Commander Zethrak stood before the ruling council. His military career was over, but they had kept him alive to learn from his mistakes. Explain again, the council leader demanded. Why did the humans fight instead of paying? They value principles over convenience, Zethrak replied. They understand that paying ransom once means inviting more ransoms. They chose short-term risk for long-term security. And their fighting capability? Greater than expected. They use simple, reliable technology combined with creative tactics. Their crews work together with impressive coordination. And they do not give up. Even when the odds were against them, they kept fighting. The council discussed this in their clicking language for several minutes. Finally, the leader spoke again. The Hive will not target humans for capture or ransom again. This is now official policy. We will approach them as equals, not prey. A wise decision, Zethrak said. In other parts of the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. A pirate clan that had been planning raids on human cargo ships changed their plans. A mercenary group that sometimes engaged in kidnapping for profit added humans to their do not target list. A hostile empire that had been considering testing human defenses decided to wait and gather more intelligence first. The message was clear and simple. Humans fight back. Humans don't surrender. Humans protect their own. On the mining colony on Titan, life had returned to normal for the crew of the Northern Star. Chris Wade went back to work on the mining equipment. Beth taught classes at the colony school. Emma played with other children and drew pictures of spaceships, but they remembered. At night, when Emma had nightmares about the Hive, Chris would hold her and tell her about Captain Miller and the Valiant. About how humans take care of each other. About how being scared is okay as long as you keep being brave. Greg Barnes took a new cargo run, this time carrying supplies to Mars. Before leaving Titan, he made a point to look up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Valiant was on patrol keeping humans safe. He felt grateful and proud to be part of a species that refused to be victims. On Earth, in the Space Service Academy, the incident became required study for all cadets. Not just as a tactical exercise, though the battle was brilliantly executed, but as a lesson in principles, in the balance between compassion and strength, in understanding that sometimes the hardest right choice is refusing the easy wrong choice. Admiral Grant gave a speech to a new graduating class. When Commander Zethrak asked Captain Miller why we wouldn't pay the ransom, he didn't understand the answer. He couldn't comprehend how we could risk lives for a principle, but that principle is what makes us strong. We care about every individual life. We'll fight to save our people, but we won't compromise our values to do it. We won't become victims. We won't reward evil, and we won't give up ever. The cadets listened carefully. They understood they were joining something bigger than themselves. A service dedicated to protecting humanity while maintaining humanity's values. Back on the Valiant, Dan stood on the bridge as his ship moved through space toward its new assignment. Katie was at her station, Frank at his. Paul was in his lab. Terry was at the helm. His crew, his people. Course laid in for the Outer Rim colonies, Terry reported. "Take us out," Dan ordered. Standard speed. As the ship accelerated, Dan thought about everything that had happened. The rescue, the battle, the aftermath. The message that had spread across the galaxy. It was a simple message, really. But it was important. It defined humanity's place among the stars. Not as conquerors, not as victims, but as people who stood by their principles no matter the cost. Other species would test them again. There would be more conflicts, more challenges, but humanity had drawn its line, had made its position clear. They would explore the galaxy with open hands and curious minds. They would make friends and allies. They would trade and share knowledge, but they would not be prey, would not be victims, would not surrender their values, and if threatened, they would fight. With intelligence, with courage, with determination. Because that's what humans did. That's who they were. Dan smiled as the stars streaked past. Somewhere out there, Emma was growing up safe. Families were living their lives without fear. Colonies were being built and dreams were being pursued, all because humanity had said no to evil, had refused to be bullied, had stood up and fought back. The message was spreading across the galaxy, carried on every frequency, translated into every language. A simple declaration that would echo through space for generations. Dear aliens, you won't get a ransom from us. You'll get something far more powerful. You'll get humanity standing together, refusing to back down, protecting its own with fierce determination. You'll get the message that we're here. We're strong and we're not going anywhere. You'll get humanity at its finest,